Thank you for still being here with us. Well, on October 1st, 2024, Nigeria experienced another milestone when she celebrated her independence. And while 64 years post-independence, Nigeria still grapples with a few sectorial developments in the area of the economy, human rights, poverty, and so many other things. Well, Dr. Udo Jude Ilo joins us this morning in the studio. He is an international development expert. So we're going to X-ray Nigeria and 64 through the lens of international development. Good morning, Ilo.
Thank you for having me.
How are you, sir?
I'm good.
I can see that. So we are pretty curious. We want to know exactly what is international development, because a lot of conversation has gone down, right, on this particular discussion, Nigeria 64, where we have been, where we're going to, where we are currently, but none really about international development. And one will wonder, what is international development? So in a few words, you know, and in plain words, what is international development?
I wonder if I wonder if there's any special definition to international.
It mustn't be a definition. It could
but
be.
I just to say, I mean, that term is used to connote the general and holistic trajectory of a country or of a people from one point to another. That is, how has the country evolved in terms of providing basic necessities of life, in terms of the economy, in terms of welfare of the citizens. So when we talk about international development practitioners, it's more about people who try to work in this area to ensure that the benefits of governance is getting to the people and helping create both local, national, and international system that allows for that kind of inclusive and equitable development of humankind, you know, across the globe. So in the context of Nigeria, if we're talking development in terms of where Nigeria is right now, is also looking at things like human development indices and all of these other things. I'm not very particular about some of these terms. I rather approach this conversation more from the point of view of where is Nigeria now, and how does it affect me as a Nigerian, and what am I expecting that the country could do better. That is the perspective I can bring to the conversation.
Yes.
Because everything that has to do with the welfare, the well-being of Nigerians cannot be roped into human development, national development, local development, and whatever.
Well, of course, Nigeria 64. Some people were not even born when Nigeria started, and then they came into the system to see how the system was and how it's going. My question would be, how has Nigeria gone far from when it was? Because we hear a lot of people say that it was better, way better, at the earlier stage of Nigeria, where
was it?
Some people say. That's why I said some people say. So now, what's your take on this? Do you think Nigeria is getting better? Let me make the question straightforward. With the military regime and now that we have the civil regime.
You know, this is this is a very loaded question, and there are so many ways to get into this conversation. So if we want to get into the technical elements, you know, we start talking about the Human Development Index, we start talking about GDP, we start talking about income parity, we start talking about earning power and all of those things. If I can't explain it to a 10-year-old.
If I can come in just a little, because quite frankly, the question is loaded. Can we conceptualize, you know, our conversation, maybe to deal with, maybe in terms of economic stability, environmental sustainability, maybe education, you know, maybe health, just, you know, like human rights. So you could pick from any of that, and let's move the conversation forward.
I was going to say that the way I'm approaching the conversation, if I can't explain it to my 7-year-old daughter or a 10-year-old daughter, then I can't explain it.
True. So
the question I will ask myself is, are we better off as a nation today than we were 64 years ago? Now, there are no right answers, if you ask me. Because somebody can say, I remember my father telling us stories about how university students get fed. And
I heard those stories
yes.
myself.
But how many people were in the university at that time? As against the population of Nigeria. I've heard people say things like, oh, but the quality of education was way better. That is correct. But they didn't have a cell phone. So these are different era and different time. So my comparison wouldn't necessarily be what was then and what was now.
You're saying there are so many variables
Yes.
that come to play.
What I'm saying is that looking at other countries that we started with, we've done terribly.
We're talking,
Terribly.
you're talking within
Yes.
the continent and outside of the
Outside of
continent.
the continent, comparatively. If you
Comparatively.
look at where we started and when we started and where we are now.
Can you give us a comparative analysis of
Yes.
between Nigeria and probably a country like Ghana or Kenya, because we actually
No, I won't choose those countries.
okay,
Yeah,
which
we won't
country
choose
which
those
country would you
countries.
choose and why?
Yes.
I would say something like this. When Nigeria became independent, within that same period, you had countries like Singapore.
Yes.
You had countries like
Malaysia, yes.
You had countries like Ghana. You had countries like Nairobi,
Kenya, yeah.
and a whole lot of other of these countries. Now, it's not a very simple analysis, but most of these countries, especially the Asian countries I mentioned,
Malaysia, Singapore.
invested a lot in human development. So countries like Singapore invested so much in education that today Singapore is considered a developed country. Singapore, I'm not sure the population at this moment, but I'm not sure they're up to the size of Lagos. But the economy is bigger than ours in terms of the way they are perceived globally, right? So that tells you we missed something on the road. The quality of leadership is different. Even when you go to Kenya and look at their road network, starting from there, it's a smaller country than Nigeria, their road network, their rail network, power supply and the rest of it. There's a remarkable difference from what you get there and what you're getting in Nigeria. So from the point of view of just a comparative look, not an in-depth, just looking at what is happening around us, we're not doing as well as we should. But we also have an advantage over these countries. We've got our oil, which most of these countries don't have in the quantity that we have it. We are the largest concentration of black people on earth. We have hundreds of millions of people. How much have we invested in making sure that these human resources that we have turns our country into a land flowing with milk and honey?
Before you continue, just promise me. Now, you spoke about oil. And it's just, I'm sure you've seen and you've heard, of course, of all the back and forth from the oil sector. I mean, oil, we having it, of course, has given us an edge, but then our management system, do you think that our management system with the oil sector has been fantabulous?
I don't need to say it. We know it's not. We know it's been bad.
So is there an advantage really to us?
It was an advantage, but we misused it. So that's the point I'm trying to make. When you do these comparisons about countries, you also talk about the advantages, the things that they should have used to the advantage. And you know, it's not just oil. We literally have everything.
Including human capital.
Yes, which is the biggest asset. You know, Lee Kuan Yew, who
Singaporean
was
Prime Minister.
the founding Prime Minister of Singapore. In 2007, I was opportune to be in a room with him, with other people. And we asked him, you know, what makes Singapore thick? What is this thing? What is the one thing you will say was the magic wand that, you know, gave you the kind of country we've created? And he said to us, it's the human development. It's the human resources that we have in Singapore. And he deliberately invested in them. They sent thousands of young Singaporeans to the best schools in the world. And he said to us, when I send these kids out, I know some of them will not come back. But if 2, 3 eventually come back, I know what they can do for my country. So the human development strategy of Singapore was top-notch. And we've seen that in countries like South Korea, in countries like Malaysia, where government is very deliberate about the way they help young people to acquire leadership and technical skills that helps them to develop their country.
Yeah.
Okay, and then speaking about the same man, the second thing he talked about why their country was a success story was how they've been able to use their diversity.
In terms of?
Yes, they don't have 250 ethnic groups, but they have the Malay, they have the Chinese, all the small minority groups. And it wasn't easy. Keep in mind that Singapore and Malaysia were one and the same about,
yes.
But because of these ethnic tensions, they had to separate, right? However, it was deliberate. If you go to Singapore, you see all these high rises. And I remember him telling us that, yes, they don't have a lot of land, but when they build those high rises, they make the very tall buildings, they make sure that those who live in those apartments are from various ethnic groups. So they bring them together to live in the same house, because he said, when you know your neighbor, you stop fearing their people, right? And if we relate that to the Nigeria context again, we see that we have managed our diversity badly. We have refused, almost 60 years after, to talk about what happened in the Civil War, to tell each other we are sorry for what happened. We have refused to make our development inclusive. So it is about, this government will favor me, either because of your personal proximity to the government or because of tribal affiliation to that government. The basis of our relationship is transactional and extractive. What do we get out of the system rather than what we give into the system? We've got systems, the structure of our government, the structure of our laws that are really programmed to make sure that those in power are not held accountable and that the systems are rigged for a few people. We are now at a level where our government is effectively captured. Both our INEC, our legislature, and all the structures that allows for inclusive development. Our development is not inclusive. Our income gap is enormous. It is only in Nigeria and countries like Nigeria that you become a rich man by becoming a politician. It is only in Nigeria that businesses are poorer than government officials. And you can't have those kind of distortions within the system and expect that system to function. And so to your point, we've got everything we needed to make this country great. We have botched it tremendous in a way that is amazingly annoying, if I may say it that way. And increasingly, and the final point I want to make is that the quality of leadership since 1960 has been on the decline. At this point, I would say it is abysmal. And in all the countries that started off with us, that are making progress across the world, leadership has been a driving factor. You had a Lee Kuan Yew who ran what he called a clean government. That was another point he made, that he ran a clean government. Corruption, there was zero tolerance for corruption. But his civil servants and top government officials were paid like they were in the private sector. So it's about leadership. You had a Mandela who was able to drive the reconciliation of the past and the future in South Africa and allow the country to avoid what was going to be a bloody history, even though it's already bloody, but it would have been worse. If you go to Botswana, they've got their own story of how their leadership was able to rally people in their country to donate cows for them to be able to build a university. You go to Rwanda with all its complications and issues of human rights abuse, but they found a leader who has at least a clear purpose. His methods, questionable, but at least he's providing leadership. You can't say the same for Nigeria.
All right, Dr. Ilu. You've spoken to so many things as to why some other climes, some other places which got their independence right about the same time Nigeria did, and how they are doing so well. Spoke so well about Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, human capital development. And I was actually going to ask you and say, okay, between 1999 and now, what are those things you feel that we did not get right and we are grappling with? And you have spoken so much with, including, practicing non-inclusive, government. So my question to you now will be, because there's this story that came to me when you spoke about Lee Kuan Yew. He was on his way to somewhere, and then he was behind a truck carrying garbage, and then at a point the garbage wasn't well packed, so he was just dropping on the streets, and he abandoned where he was going, followed the truck down to where he was going, and those guys were fined and asked to pay. Do you think part of his human capital development strategy was kind of like infusing morality, aside the fact that, okay, we have to make our relationships less transactional, we have to make our government inclusive, we have to find a system that throw up good leaders? What do you think about the role of morality in development?
So the problem with morality is that it's subjective. And that creates a problem. And sometimes it draws a lot from religion. And many religious principles don't align. And so...
But are they core principles that actually do align?
I mean, there are core principles of, honesty, empathy, helping each other.
That'll make someone want to stand in a queue, that'll make someone not want to throw garbage off of a moving vehicle and things like that.
But I think the biggest compeller of good behavior is enforcement of rules.
Okay.
Human beings are nice, but we rarely do the right thing just for the sake of it. There has to be consequences and there has to be a reward. So I am not one to advocate for good behavior driven by moral convictions. No. Because people's moral convictions could mean blowing up themselves for the sake of God. So I'm not going to go there. I will say that I want to live in a country where the law is respected. I want to live in a country where everybody is subject to the same set of rules. I want to live in a country where my bank account doesn't determine how my government treats me. That's the kind of country I want to live in. And I think it is possible if we have leaders who model good behavior. We have not seen that in a very long time. If anything, our leaders tell us on a daily by their reprehensible behavior that is all man for himself, and that this contraption called Nigeria is a cake. We should all be worried when our country is defined, the resources of our country is defined as a national cake. Just think about that analogy that we use for Nigeria, national cake. So it is already made. It doesn't require you to do anything. Then you cut the cake, you eat it, you don't put anything back. You never go to a birthday and you eat cake and you bring back the cake. No. So that analogy of national cake tells you the extractive nature and the transactional nature of our relationship, each and every one of us with the country, Nigeria. I have argued that the reason why we have that kind of transactional relationship is that loving Nigeria is like shouting into an echo chamber. You just hear the echo of your voice. Nobody answers you back. It is a love that is not returned.
Is it a hopeless situation then?
It's not a hopeless situation. It can't be hopeless. If it's hopeless, you guys won't be here. It is not a hopeless situation. But we cannot gloss over the fact that we're in a terrible situation. So we need to understand where we're coming from, which is a history of reprehensible behavior of our leaders, a history of abusive relationship between the states and Nigerians, a history of hope lost, hope dashed. We have to move from that to something different. And so it means a couple of things. One, we can't be doing the things we've been doing in the past anymore if we want to have a different kind of a country. We cannot. We just had an election in Enugu State where PDP won all the local government seats.
Yes.
Is the pattern all over the country?
Same thing in Anambra.
Exactly. So what will make a politician who comes into the field to play by the rules?
Okay, so before you continue, because of time, let's talk about this international aid that we get quite often. I mean, you say one thing, we're getting aid from when cholera started, we got 10,000 from US, I think. Now, are those aids, are they really helpful to us?
It will shock you to know that in the 70s, Nigeria was giving loan to the IMF. Yes. Nigeria was giving loan to the IMF. And somebody just shared with us a circular from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs talking about the steps they've taken to ensure that the countries that receive these loans actually use it for what it was given for. And so you move from giving loans in 1970 to being a heavily indebted country in 1990s for Obasanjo to go and then go for the debt relief. We've become a heavily indebted country in within 20 years. We went from giving money to then receiving loan as a low-income country and, and a highly indebted country. So my point is, we can't just say that the loans and aids we get are useless or we don't use them well. I'm sure people do some good work, but somebody defined our bureaucracy, trying to do things differently in our bureaucracy, like going into a swimming pool and you throw in a chair in the swimming pool. When you throw in that chair, there are ripples all over the place. You know, you see it.
Yes.
And then the chair settles to the floor of the swimming pool. If you remove that chair, it looks like it was never there. That is the definition of somebody, a government official, on how change happens in the bureaucracy. So that is my answer to your question.
Okay, so very quickly, you mentioned a very saddening paradigm change from being from granting loans to becoming serious, debtors as a nation, right? What would you attribute that to? What would be the cause of that paradigm shift? Would it be, because I know as of 77 we're celebrating Festac and things like that. At what point, what was it that happened? Was it a policy? Was it a government change? What happened that took us from a very wealthy nation to a nation that's
when you make a lot of money is you invest them. You don't just give them out.
So that was the cause.
It was part of it. Gowon didn't know jack, as far as I'm concerned, about how to manage the resources of Nigeria. And they blew that opportunity because it was a windfall.
And that trend has continued.
Yes, because even before Tinubu became, he just announced subsidies gone without even understanding the system is coming to be.
So that's to my point. And so for me, a couple of things need to change.
Yeah. One
is that power has rarely considered anything in history. Read your Bible, read anything you want, historical documents. Power has never considered anything without demand. And so, if things are going to change, we have to demand it. We need to make the lives of those who've put in power uncomfortable when they do the wrong thing. Easier said than done.
I was going to get to that.
Because they're going to give a couple of people money, they'll protest against people going to protest. We've seen that happen in Nigeria.
Yes.
I've never seen that anywhere in this world.
Where
people are protesting so that other people will not protest. So I saw that in this country for the first time this year. So, I mean, we can't go into the dynamics of how we can make that demand happen, but we need to make those demands. Secondly, we need to plug the leaks.
What does that mean?
In our system.
Okay.
The way money is stolen. An aerospace agency is building roads somewhere was it in Lagos or in which state again? Who does that? How is that within their mandate? But it's happening under this administration. So we have to plug the leaks. If we can protect 80% of our budget and use it for actually what it is meant for, I think we can start seeing changes in the in the development of our country. The third thing is we are not building leaders. We're also not building people who can help build the country. So our educational system is a bit of a mess. Our overly, I'm looking for the right word here, the too much emphasis we have on education, university education and all of that, without also investing money in skills. Technical schools is killing us. So we've got all these graduates who have no idea what they graduated with and what that means in the real world, sitting out here and being unemployable. Because when you talk about unemployment in Nigeria, you also talk about employability of some of these young chaps. So we need to do the way to build a nation is to build the people. So those are the three things I can put on the table, but there's a whole lot you can talk about.
So if we had more time, trust me, we would have stayed.
I just feel we didn't even touch the topic. We just barely scratched the surface. And he has so much to give.
So much. Yeah. So, of course, you can go back again and watch this interview on our Facebook, on our YouTube. You would find it there. And you can find excerpts in Instagram and TikTok as well. So please and please make sure you watch this again. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, we're going to be moving over to something else. And of course, you're going to like this. I mean, tithing in church. Do you really want to hear that conversation? Well, we're giving you the conversation because, of course, the founder, not the founder now, but the GO of Redeemed Christian Church of God, that is Adeboye, came out to apologize for saying that tithe would lead you to hell. Without paying your tithe, you'll be going to hell. So, of course, we're going to be having that conversation. We'll see you after this.